Hey there. Welcome to the F1 starting grid. It's great to be back with you all for another season. I'm Barry, and I'm here with
Chad,
Hey
we're
Chad.
back.
We're back. No Micah this season. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to continue with us. And as you might have noticed, last season we kind of dropped off later in the season. A lot of life change happening for all three of us, in fact,
Yes.
and it just made getting these things together really tough. We were still chatting, but just didn't have the time. But Chad and I were like, hey, we want to get back to this. We love just chatting about Formula One, and 2024 is off and running. Chad, good to see you, man.
It's so good to be back, and yeah, we were certainly. I mean, the pause of the podcast was no indication of the season interest or what was happening because there still was stuff
For
happening.
sure.
Goodness gracious, Red Bull ending like they did. There was so much to talk about. But yeah, we're back. We're excited. What a great start to the season. And before the season even started, Barry, there was some interesting shenanigans happening. Of course, you never know when silly season's going to kick off and what teams
Right,
are going to be doing. And
right.
so, what do you think about? I think one of the biggest news stories that we heard pre Bahrain in the testing with a certain driver that's pretty incredible.
Bro, I Lewis going to Ferrari is, there was a lot of ruminations and rumblings and
Yeah,
speculation about whether, and in fact, it was funny because in Drive to Survive that released, and in Drive to Survive, it was almost like an emphatic, like this isn't going to
yep,
happen,
yep.
and it had happened, and you know,
So cool.
I'm excited for him. Honestly, I'm excited for him. He's been with Mercedes for a
Yeah,
long time, but it is, I know I have this theory. I feel like I'd heard someone say once, doesn't matter which team you root for, everyone's a Ferrari fan. And if you've been around Ferrari long enough, especially for those of you who may be newer to the sport, Ferrari is historically that it is the most dominant team in the history of the sport. They are iconic. Some of the
yeah,
best drivers. Michael Schumacher drove for Ferrari, and they've had times in their past where they've not performed well. But over the course of you know Formula One's history, Ferrari has been there. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, they're the only team that has raced in the entire. They've been present for Formula One through the entirety of Formula One Grand Prix being a thing. So now I'm stoked for him. I'm excited. How do you feel about it?
yeah. I am too. I mean, when the news came out, you always wonder, like, is this just some tabloid? Somebody saw, Lewis talking with the Ferrari leadership or something at a restaurant, and all of a sudden he's moving over. So I
Right,
took it with a grain of salt at first, and then I follow a couple pretty reputable journalists in the F1 world, and I remember some people saying some stuff, and I'm like, okay, they don't usually just talk about
right,
speculation.
right,
Uh, and so when it happened, and then really realizing, I think what's behind it, right? He wanted to not only win an eighth championship. I mean, that is his goal.
right,
Seeing what's coming out of
right,
Mercedes, I think he was already questioning that, but he was, somewhat connected and didn't wanna totally change, but now he's also thinking about his twilight career, right, after
yes,
this.
yes,
And so, I know for a fact now that Mercedes wasn't wanting to give him, uh, the deal for post driving, and having an ambassadorship and connection to the brand, which to me seems crazy. I mean, you
right,
won so much with one driver, and you're not going to give him that, and you can
right,
keep making money off of that in perpetuity. Okay, that doesn't make sense. So that, and then just some of the other kind of other details. And Ferrari's willing to pay him handsomely right now. They were willing to give him that. Which
yep,
imagine being another brand that's already mega. You get a champion driver coming over to end his career with you, and you get to use that for the future. This big
yeah,
wins a championship. Now he is a Ferrari driver.
right.
So
Well,
stock went up more than they
yeah,
even paid in that. Like,
huge
that's,
jump.
I mean, it was like they could have paid him a lot more and still
Right,
walked away making money. So I think Mercedes was kind of silly. And I did find out, I think it was in Drive to Survive or somewhere else, that Toto actually mentioned they didn't want to have what happened when Lewis and Nico were in and Max came into the fold. They didn't have any roster spots
right,
available to put it in. So they don't, Lewis locked up long term for this upcoming
yeah,
what's his name? I'm blanking on the young kid's name. Uh, I'll find it here.
Oh, no, yeah, the new driver. No, I think that's a good point, is this seems like it's good for Lewis, it's good for Ferrari, but it's also good for Mercedes, as evidenced by this weekend's race, is that, Lewis wasn't at the front of the pack. He ran a good race, um, but he wasn't performing as well as he could be, and so, yeah, I think it's a good thing for it to, and like Toto said in Drive to Survive, we've gotta make room, and, they already have a younger driver in George Russell who is, I mean, at least this last weekend, outperformed Lewis, and so it'll be interesting to see how that rolls out, but, they're playing the long game for sure,
Yep,
and, we've seen this, you have, like, Alonso, who's a former world champion, and he's jumped around, he's driven in different
yep,
places. Um, Crazy that this weekend was the 20th anniversary of the Bahrain Grand Prix, and
yeah,
Alonso
it's
was
there.
there for the first one,
Yep,
and
yep,
I'm like, that
yep.
that I dig him. I'm sporting the green
I
today.
know, I know.
So,
I didn't. It's early here for me. I'm still wearing my TJ. But yeah, I wish, could it be crazy enough to think that, yeah, he would be in a Mercedes seat again after his departure? Who knows?
yeah. No,
Who knows?
it could be.
It
I
King Antonelli was the guy that I was thinking of, by the way.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Formula 2 driver that I think is,
Right,
they're hyping him up to be the next Verstappen, so that's what I heard. They wanted to make sure that they had a spot open, or whoever they put in there, a shorter, stopgap, and not give Lewis, 3 or something, and limit their ability to
right.
potentially, bring up this guy from the bullpen.
Yeah. Well, and another interesting little factoid for this season was that all 20 drivers that drove last year are driving this year, and I think that's the first time it's ever
Um,
happened.
Yep, first time in history, so,
Yeah, no driver changes, and I think that says a lot of where
yeah,
the sport is at, the level of drivers we have. It's gonna be a fun season. I think that the mid-pack battles were really great this weekend. We saw some
yeah,
really, really good racing, including some tension, some racing between teammates. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how Ricardo and Sonoda, how that kind of ramps up over the season. Ricardo came into RB, whatever the name of the team is now, RB Visa, blah blah blah. But yeah, he came into RB, then Alpha Tauri, as a second driver, essentially, with Yuki filling that primo spot.
right.
And I think Yuki feels like, hey, I need to be looked at that way. So the team instructions to swap places this week really rubbed him the wrong way. And
Yeah, for our viewers, if you haven't been watching or had heard, yeah, AlphaTauri has switched their names to it's still Red Bull owned team, but now
right,
they're the Cash App Red Bull team, and more commonly just called RB. All the podcasts or all the pundits and things, they just say RB during the race for short, but it ultimately just showed their connectedness more to Red Bull in this new season. But yeah, it's interesting. I think how with their more alignment with Red Bull, now you really talk about what Red Bull's long-term plan is for the Red Bull team, the main team, and seeing how things are playing out with the RB team and Yuki and Ricardo, pulling in some team orders that early when they're not going for any points and stuff like that. You're like, they're obviously in some ways preferential treatment to Daniel,
sure,
which
sure,
we've seen that in his career coming in
right,
and just kind of the process. If you watch Drive to Survive, there's a whole episode that even kind of just showcases Christian Horner, the team owner, principal of Red Bull Racing, the main team, how much he enjoys Daniel and
yeah,
really hopes that he,
yeah,
progress. So I can't imagine that there wasn't a little bit of talk. Hey, if there's something we want to give Daniel some preference,
right,
help.
right. Well, I mean, he is an ambassador for the sport, and
100%. Yeah.
probably I would say Lewis maybe would be another driver who has that kind of high level visibility. I know here in the US, right, Daniel loves the US and the American audience loves Daniel. And so it's not just about driving ability, though that has to be there, but it's
Right.
also what's best for the sport because each one of these drivers has to attract sponsors as well. And
Yep.
so because Yuki's little antics after the race on the cool down lap, I don't know if you got to see that,
Oh,
but
yeah. Oh, yeah.
so for those of you who didn't see that part because it wasn't televised, it's actually if you have F1 TV, if you have the app, go back and watch it. Because on the cooldown lap, Yuki dive bombs Ricardo, tries to pass him, locks up. Ricardo just kind of passes by him, and then Yuki essentially starts racing Ricardo and almost runs into him, which on a cooldown lap after the race to risk both cars that way, I just know,
Yeah.
Red Bull as an overall team, Red Bull, RB, they have no tolerance for that stuff. And so, Yuki's he's a great driver, but I don't think he's necessarily a great spokesman for the sport. And so I
Sure.
can see that with Daniel. There's gonna be that uh, that winning smile. They want that to keep showing up
Yeah.
in different
Yeah.
places.
Even the post race, Daniel had said some things, they both did, and I was just like, "Ooh, this is early, and you guys already publicly." I mean, they weren't slamming each other, but they were not mixing words,
Yeah.
and, okay, this is not gonna go in the direction that they want. So, um, yeah, it's interesting. So you have them. You also have, Ferrari had some great battles. Of course, they were probably a little bit more quiet in the post interview. You didn't see like fighting, but I could see that bubbling up for over.
Right.
So you have Carlos Sainz not being continued with his contract,
Right. Right.
taking a seat. So in some ways, that guy's gotta feel like he's trying to prove to other
Yeah,
teams,
absolutely.
Red Bull, do you want to pull me in? I'm available.
Yep.
Does another team want to pull me in? I mean, he obviously wants to stay on the grid, but he's been at the top
Yeah.
uh, with the team side of things. So I could see him trying to make a pass for getting that Mercedes seat. Perez has only got a one. This is the end of his
Right.
contract, so that seat will be coming open.
Right.
And then
When
you got
those are 2 drivers, Perez and Sainz are 2 drivers who consistently finish at the front of the pack, if not on the podium. Yet, and when you think about it, like, they're relegated to, like, this, "Oh, we're not as," could be viewed as not as good, but they are at the very top of their game. It just happens to be I think Leclerc, they just have, Ferrari has high hopes for him, and of course, Max is Max, like,
sure.
right?
That was yeah.
This
Yeah.
this
No
season,
problem. Yep.
we're literally off to the races. I mean,
Yeah.
20 seconds, 22, 21.5 seconds between Max and
Right.
Paris. Like,
50 seconds though, was it last year? Was it Ferrari 50 seconds behind? Is it right? Maybe heard somewhere.
yeah, the gap between Perez and Max was closer last year in Bahrain. Max pulled out a further lead. But I think the rest of the pack was a little bit more bunched. But
Oh,
I
yeah,
mean, Max is just he's just in a league of his own.
other level.
And
Um,
you know, I
yeah,
I saw an interview with, Albon, because Albon had been Max's teammate, and so he
right.
was comparing cars, and the interviewer had asked him, like, "Aren't the cars set up isn't that essentially you're driving the same car?" And he's like, "Not at all, because the drivers get to set up the cars according to their preference." And he described it like Max drives if you ever played, like, a video game and you set all the settings to the highest sensitivity, so every little input, like, is just like, like a mouse on a computer. If you just touch it, shoots across the screen. He
Yeah.
said that's how Max sets up his car. It's the sensitivity is so high, and probably most other drivers would get in Max's car and just crash.
Mm.
Uh, and so he drives on that ragged edge, and that's part of it's just his driving style.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, yeah, just what he's doing, what he, in relation to Verstappen specifically, just yeah, he's another level. So confident in his driving and what he wants, and obviously Red Bull. It was incredible to see them. I think they could have just taken last year's car, did some upgrades, and come in and been all right. But them to come in with a whole new concept,
Right.
and continue to push. And I think a lot of people said, are they copying Mercedes last year's? I mean, every team's going to look at different things and say, "Oh, that's interesting," but ultimately, Red Bull, that's a whole new
Yeah.
progression of a new car. That's not them saying, "Oh, that was a good way to go. Let's just jump over to that."
Right.
Me specifically, and whether or not it was an actually looking at a Mercedes car or that was just the progression of things. It's incredible what they're doing, and
Yeah.
it frustrates me that so many people continue to say Adrian Newey and give him all the credit. He is not developing the car. I mean, he's a part of the team.
Right.
Everything that I've read and seen and even heard from him is he's like, I'm not in there sketching stuff. I mean, I might, they might pull me in for different things, but there's an incredible team of young
Yeah. Yeah.
dynamicists and designers, car designers that are in there doing that. And I think it's in some ways it protects, probably insulates Red Bull's team from getting poached because they don't really know who is the leader or spearheader of that.
Yeah.
But I just think it does a disservice to them to not give them credit for what they've been, doing and are doing. But
Yeah.
yeah,
No, for sure.
probably strategy on Red Bull's end. But
Well, speaking of Red Bull, the other thing that happened in the offseason was the allegations that came against Christian Horner, and we don't have to delve into that. They're doing the investigations that he was cleared, and now stuff was leaked, and FIA is involved. But what are your thoughts about how this is affecting or could potentially affect Red Bull?
I mean, there's no way it can't. I think this could be, if you look back in history, this could be that marker that could potentially have stopped a potential team from and Max even from breaking the record with Red Bull.
Right.
I could see this being the beginning of the splintering of Red Bull, because no matter what happens and whatever decision they make, people are gonna probably fall on one side of the equation.
Right.
I want part of
Right.
this because of what they're doing, or I don't want to be a part of this because of what they're doing. And ultimately, I could see some splintering of the team and that cohesion that they
Yeah.
have that ultimately ends up in breaking that up. And so
Right.
I mean, even, and I don't know why he's doing this, but Max's dad has been speaking out pretty openly about his frustration with Christian. I just read something yesterday, I think it was, that I mean, he's making some very deep statements about like he needs to go and he's the root problem of, these teams' issues. And
Right.
um but what makes me wonder is that Max thinking that too, and is his dad's just the one that's out voicing it, or is that a completely independent thought? And, if Max decides at some point there's some instability there, does he look at something like a Mercedes seat as somewhere to go? Uh,
It's a good
I
point.
don't know.
Yeah.
And then subsequently, just all the development of the car and, even some of these
Right.
other drivers coming in, like, that's gotta be playing in your mind to say, "Do I
Right.
really wanna go in there if let's say Christian left, if they forced him to leave, um, good, bad, or indifferent, whatever you feel like, a lot of people wanna drive for Christian. I mean, they see him as the reason why that team is, him and
Right.
Adrian kind of in the
Right.
partnership. If he's not there, now who are you putting in that spot? And do I have the confidence in Red Bull in the future? Let alone like some of these sponsors, like Ford's supposed to be building a power unit for them in the next,
Yeah.
unit iteration. Are they going to leave? And then what does Red Bull do? Because they already let Honda leave. They're
Right.
going to Austin. So
Right.
now do you have a power unit provider?
Yeah.
Or
No,
just the
it's where those personal decisions, of course, have, like, huge ramifications beyond the personal space can have that huge impact on the team, and I think that's something with the team principle is it's the team principle brings so much of the cultural mindset to the team. They set the tone for the team, which is why we see, I mean, and unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for their sake, Haas lost Gunter Steiner, who's a great personality. Of course, I think made Drive to Survive what it is. But I think an argument could be made for how good of a team principal is he, and it'll be interesting to see. I mean, all both Haas drivers, even yesterday, were saying, "Hey, the tires performed this like the car is not eating tires like it did last season." That was their big thing. They're great in qualifying. Both Hulkenberg and Magnussen putting incredibly fast lap times. But when it comes to the race pace, they just couldn't keep it, and so they performed better yesterday than they had last season. I don't know if you can fully put that on Gunter Steiner's shoulder, but it definitely affects the culture. I think even watching Drive to Survive every race, he's just cussing like crazy, and then he's going off into his office, and there's the classic line, right?
Obviously,
Hygiene,
Gene.
hygiene, you
Gene,
know.
having some news. Yes, Gene.
and it just so the team principle is really critical, and Horner has been with Red Bull from day one. Um, but if this starts affecting the team's performance overall at any level, whether it's car performance or the team's just cohesiveness, yeah, I could see, if Max stops winning races in Red Bull, I don't think he'll stay. I'll think
Yeah.
he'll find a
No,
different team.
he's
Like,
not connected, or he hasn't committed to them.
no,
Yeah, I
no.
mean, yeah,
Especially with Josh Verstappen, his dad, just who just always seems kind of pissed off. He just
yeah,
always has like that
yep, that angry, whatever,
right.
expression,
You're
like,
like, come on, dude. Even when things are good. But yeah,
you should
by the way, it's his birthday today, Josh Verstappen's birthday today. So happy birthday to you.
yep, yeah,
Uh,
friend of the pod, if you wanna come join us, we're
right.
happy to
After we just said that he
on,
always pissed off. But
yep. Well, you call it make it right, y'all, so, we make
right,
sure. Uh,
right, right.
yeah, it is very I also like, I think there are also some feud between, Christian and Helmut Marko, which Helmut Marko is on the Red Bull leadership team, for those that don't know the inner workings, and he is part of helping with the young development and, new drivers, so he's often looking at the next class of drivers and really has revolutionized, I think, Red Bull's young driver program and bringing in some new talent, so he's been really instrumental in that from what I can see. But I have heard some feuding there. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see kind of what happens with Red Bull and in this recent allegation and how the FIA jumps in,
Right.
even when you talk about just abuse of power. And I'm interested at that level too, just because I feel like you know, uh, I know a lot of other worlds have talked about, abusive leadership, and I think it's an important topic to really take seriously. And I'm not
Yeah,
saying I'm going one. I don't know a whole lot of the inner workings of what's going on, but I just know it is an important conversation, and it could be a point in which, for a male-dominated sport,
right.
to really lean in and say this. This is how we're going to take a stand in these spaces,
Yeah,
and hopefully do what's right, for all parties involved. So,
for
so
sure.
we'll see what
No,
goes.
it'll be good. I think there's some of those aspects of the sport that do need to be tidied up, and I mean, and it's true, like you said, across the board, any organization.
Yep.
But Formula One is so visible and increasing all the more. So some work to be there. Hey, McLaren, um, they look pretty good this weekend. I mean,
Yeah.
not where they wanted to be, but Lando and Piastri both putting in some,
Yep.
especially in qualifying. Dude, did you catch Q1? The time difference between first and last was 1 second.
Oh wow.
20 cars, 1 second. Like, that's crazy. I think even Martin Brundle was saying, like, he couldn't recall a time where the times have been so close. So yeah, that's crazy. But yeah, McLaren, any thoughts about the papaya car?
Yeah, I'm a huge McLaren fan. I've loved Lando. I love McLaren when Daniel was there as well. I mean, I'm a big McLaren fan. So I think last year I was really excited how they finished, but I also was with a grain of salt, just because you saw how Aston, your your shirt,
Mhm.
in heavy early, and then didn't have the continued upgrades throughout the
Right.
season. And they
Right.
probably used a lot of their money on the forend to try to, really get
Right.
after it, and they didn't have money and progression, or however it was, played out,
Yeah.
further in part of the season. So my thoughts were McLaren started off really crummy, and that was very public. I mean, I think their car wasn't fully ready even for testing last year.
Right. Right.
And then comes in strong. So I was kind of like, okay, this is good. Maybe this is a sign of where they can progress. But I was also like, did they just blow all their money for the
True.
2024 car last year? Or all those things going on in my mind. So
Right.
um testing, I was watching it, kind of like, okay, let's see. And then seeing him this weekend, and I was happy. The post race interview, Lando did mention the Bahrain track specifically, he hates.
Right.
Both he and Piastri did a post race interview on the F1 TV, whatever recording, and they both were talking about like it's one of the last corners. They
Yeah.
both just could not make it. I mean,
Right.
Lando was joking, he's like, I drive that better on a game. He's like, I could be out there in a road car driving it better. He's like, I could not take that corner. So
Right.
uh, I just think as good as they did, I think in a track where they didn't think they were going to do very good, and they weren't necessarily building everything to work good on Jeddah, because that's not necessarily a specific track that's going to be out there in the future. I think it's very positive, and they're both fantastic drivers, and I'm really
Yeah.
excited to Lando thinking needs his first win.
He
Golly,
does.
he's got the doesn't he have the record now for most podiums but no
No win.
wins,
I
which
believe
is
so.
not
Yeah.
a record
We'll have to
you want.
confirm that for our next episode, but I believe that sounds right. And I mean, it's the to be the level of driver that he is, because I think we see some drivers come into the sport, and you know that they're good, but they're not going to be champions. But I think we've got quite a few drivers on the grid who, I think Lando and Piastri both are championship level drivers. I think George Russell is a championship level driver. I it'll be it, given the right car, these guys will drive the wheels off of them and perform well. Of course, you go from tracks like Bahrain, which the wind issue in Bahrain is huge. If the wind
Right,
shifts during the race, like you think cars with the aero packages that they have and the downforce and like you wouldn't think that wind makes a big difference, but those cars are so dialed in, that the slightest variation in temperature,
right.
track temperature, air temperature, wind, it can really throw things off and throw them off around those corners. And but yeah, it'd be great to see Lando on the top step. And I think it's gonna our midfield race, I think it's gonna be really fun to see how that develops. I We already touched on this, but I want to go back to it. I think Carlos signs. I'm just eager to watch how he performs this year. I think nothing to lose. I think he's just gonna
Yep,
leave it all out there. If the car performs well, he's gonna drive um
yep.
like a bat out of hell. He's just gonna
Right, and he's got nothing to lose in terms of, I mean, like, if they did try to
go.
pull some team order stuff, I mean, it's not like, I mean, obviously doesn't wanna taint the rest of the season while he's there, so I
Right.
think he's gotta be careful to not, like, ostracize himself in that way, but
Sure.
at the same time, like, if he's got a chance of a podium or a win, like, there's no
Right.
reason for him to give it up,
Yeah.
to Leclerc, which really does drive me nuts. I don't know that I would say one of them are better, because in my opinion, and this weekend would be a great example of it, they always give an excuse for why Leclerc gets beat out by Sainz. This week, it
Right.
was his brake issues
Right.
and I'm like, so was Carlos not dealing with the same thing? Like, are their cars so different? And so
Right.
how did he, get beyond that? Because I always hear, Leclerc's the fastest in qualifying. He's the fastest like, great. But that's not what we do in racing here in F1. It's about
No.
the pack. It's that in
Right.
combination with your racecraft throughout a whole weekend.
Right.
So I'm like, when Sainz continues to win or beat you out in these situations, um, like, why do people still think he's not the better driver, or why doesn't Ferrari put them on the same level? I
Right.
get if we wanna just we have to choose one driver over the other for this Hamilton seat. I get that, and maybe it's a
Yeah.
flip of the coin, but it is just so surprising that they always tend to side with Leclerc,
Right.
um, being a
Well, he's the younger driver, right? And is that, hey, how much life, how much longer will one or the other be in the sport? I think that factors into it. You definitely see when these teams pick up a new driver and they're kind of pinning their hopes to, which is a ton of pressure. I mean, when Albon came into Red Bull, and like it was a huge jump for him, and
yeah,
just couldn't just couldn't perform
yeah,
the
yeah,
way they wanted. And there's been a lot of talk about how he just needed a couple of seasons to mature in the sport.
yep,
But but to jump into like it's off the high dive into the deep end if you
Right.
start with Red Bull and you're, and you have Max as your teammate. So,
Yep.
and that's back when, Lewis was still winning. Max was still
Chase.
challenging.
Yep.
So
Uh, yeah.
yeah, it's a lot of pressure. Um, I did hear we've got 24 races in 2024, and Max actually made a comment in a press interview that he feels like it's too much. He feels like it's too many races. Um, it's exhausting. It seems it's very glamorous, right? But you and I, we've both worked jobs where we've had to travel a lot, and the luster wears off really quickly, and you're sleeping in a different bed in a different city in a different
Yep.
time zone, like, and I think that the wear on the drivers emotionally and physically outside of just the racing is a lot. So it'll be interesting to see what F1 does in 2025. I know that, there's a lot of conversations about potential tracks, new tracks, changing tracks. But I'm interested to hear what other drivers say. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting dilemma. I mean, I know Liberty Media, who owns, the whole operation, they've seen some increase in viewership because of shows and just I think the US market and even that spilling over with some of these shows. So I think they're trying to capitalize on that. At the same time, you hear some people, especially older generation of F1 fans that are like, yeah, it's just, it's too much. But at the same time, like you go through other sports and you have, things that are weekly. And I think it could just be I don't know, some ways a reorienting of what Formula One is and how they operate, and maybe it's just a reality of what they have to get used to doing in this new era.
Right. Right.
Maybe it's just going to be the new norm, or maybe they pull it back. I don't know. I mean, the funny thing for me is like I'll watch a race every weekend if I could. I mean, I don't feel like for me some people
Absolutely.
say
Right.
like too much,
Right.
and I mean, we watch football every Sunday, in the football season. I guess I know it's not all year long, but if you're a
Yeah.
soccer fan, soccer, or baseball, I mean, like there's a lot of things that are similar where there's like regularity of that. And then all those sports do travel, maybe not across the world, but they are traveling. So, I just think some of these drivers and teams probably just have to figure out a way to make it sustainable for them.
Sure.
And there was a couple drivers on I haven't watched all of Drive to Survive this year, but I remember watching one episode and somebody was talking about just their own rhythms and what they have to do. Even I think it was Checo was just talking about how he's been in the sport for a long time now and how he finds what he can and can't do and also how he recharges and takes care of himself so he doesn't get sick and being on the road. And
Right.
I think that's probably just maybe more of what it is these guys and gals that are in the sport and working it just have to figure out, what is that rhythm. Teams
Right.
maybe have
Yeah.
uh, a different rotation of people that maybe go to races that they need to adjust that or I
Sure.
don't know. Um,
Which I mean, as hard as it is, like the thought of, if I was on a team, in any capacity, you could see like how they would just be like, I don't want to miss a single race. I want to be there for every moment that I possibly can.
right.
Well, they're not traveling far this week. They're heading over to Saudi Arabia and F1. If you didn't know this, for our listeners, Formula One has reworked their schedule a little bit, really as a kind of an environmentally conscious move
Yeah.
to say, hey, we're gonna race in particular region, do as many races in a region, so that because all those cars, all of that gear get loaded into airplanes and flown around the world. And so they're saying if we can limit the amount that we're flying the equipment around the world, it has a dramatically less impact on the environment. So quick hop over to Saudi. Any predictions for Jeddah?
Oh, I mean, outside of Red Bull dominance, um, I mean, it it's a super fast track.
Super
Um,
fast.
so my predictions is I think this early in the season going there because they don't go. It's not. It hasn't usually been this early,
No,
hasn't it? Been
no,
mid
later.
to late. Yeah. So, um, if you guys haven't seen this track, I mean the walls you know it's super fast, but then it's pretty tight. And I know they
Right.
did in some areas, but not uncommon to have some wrecks. You know, the line of sight for drivers to go around corners, oftentimes they can't see ahead of them. So you come around a corner, and if somebody's, you know, done something, there's a car or a wall.
Yeah.
So one of my predictions, I think we're gonna have some carnage or something happen. Maybe a car, you know, breaks down, or you know, we've had just some. Luckily, no cars broke down last week, but we did have some you know some interaction with cars. But I think somebody's gonna potentially hit something, and maybe
Right.
even in the first couple laps, and that could cause things to be a little interesting.
That'll shake
What?
it up for sure because we didn't have any, uh, no safety cars this last weekend. Um, Part of that is Bahrain. I forget the number. One of the F1 commentators said that well, Bahrain has the most runoff area of any track, I think, in the F1 calendar,
Okay,
and it's just big, wide open spaces, right? And so it was tens of thousands of square meters. But Jeddah does not. It is you're racing down a little alley with walls. And a lot of the tracks on our calendar have on the F1 calendar have that, but it makes for interesting racing because this is where Mick Schumacher hit the wall
yep,
in the Haas, and man, it was a huge wreck. And so it's a different mindset. It is a fast track. I think the Ferraris are going to perform pretty well. I think the Ferraris have some straight line speed that's um, I don't know. We'll see. I'm hoping that Lando and Oscar and the McLarens can perform well here as well. I think we're not going to see Haas perform as well on this track. I think we'll see them tumble a little bit. Um, and then one thing we haven't talked about today, and maybe we're going to save something for next time. But man, Alpine just what a
uh, very poor Ryan Reynolds, and who
oh
else is like Travis Kelsey? I don't know who's bought in Alpine. I feel like I see a new star that's bought a piece of Alpine. Like,
yeah,
what in the world? I remember I didn't get to see the end of quali,
yeah,
so I remember coming into the race, and I'm you know getting my setup ready, and I remember opening up the you know the grid, and I kind of did a double take, and I remember being like, wait, is this a like typo, or is this you know both Alpines at the bottom? Like,
right.
I don't know.
Right. Well, and Drive to Survive gave him a ton of screen time, and I know you haven't watched the whole thing yet, but yeah, there was a lot of Alpine focus in Drive to Survive this season, and I just kept thinking, well, they're giving him lots of content already for next season of Drive to Survive because it's not where you expect to see him. I feel badly for Ocon and Gasly because they're really good drivers, um,
Right,
but they very obviously do not have a car that's going to perform well. At least unless they can figure some stuff out. In unlike teams that like you were saying, maybe McLaren spent a good chunk of their money. And for those of you listening, if you don't know this about F1, every team has a limited amount of money that can spend on developing the car. So some teams opt to spend a lot of money up front, and then they have less left for mid-season upgrades. And some teams kind of spend less money on the front end and then trying to see how the car develops over the season, and then they spend more money on the upgrades throughout the season, which was why we see some cars kind of jump ahead later on. I don't know if that's the route that Alpine has taken or if they just have just garbage cars this year, but
yeah.
it'll make for great drama if nothing else.
It will. Yeah, you feel bad, and then I mean, you can only imagine if you're Gasly, like, man, what if I didn't leave, you know, AlphaTauri, Red Bull now? You know, they're doing. Seem like the car is doing a little bit better. Would he have been in a better place? Would his stock have been a little higher, maybe for some other seat? Um, you know, yeah, obviously hindsight's 2020, but that
Right.
was not a move up. So, yeah, poor guy. But yeah, we'll see. I hope they do all right. I think it could be they historically have been a good team. Renault, formerly, and it's kind of sad, but
Yeah.
yeah, so it'd be interesting. Jeddah, we do have another Saturday race, which is interesting
Yeah.
because of Ramadan, is what I
Right.
heard is which is cool to see F1 kind of navigating cultural dynamics per the region that they're in and kind of adjusting things, which isn't necessarily the norm for F1 to just this is when we do stuff and it's
Right.
always on. So
Right.
kind of kind of fun to see them doing something a little different and trying to abide and honor a culture that they're a part of. So
Yep.
uh, we'll see another Saturday race, and um, hopefully there's. If you remember, Verstappen didn't he hit the wall pretty hard in qualifying last year?
Did.
Which
Yeah.
uh, his back axle, I think I remember. So he's not even outside of getting some carnage happening. So it could be a
For
fun
sure.
race.
Absolutely. Prediction for top three?
I mean, I think you're gonna go with Verstappen for the win. I'm gonna go. I think Sainz is gonna get up there and get P2. And then I'm gonna go with a wild card, but I think McLaren will get a podium. Uh, we'll get Lando up there in P3. Which,
Okay.
by the way, the record that he has is the most drivers points without a win.
Win.
So it's not
Okay.
the most poles, but
Podiums with
but
points.
he's
All
yeah.
right. I can see
So
that. All right. So I'm gonna go Max with the win. I was actually gonna go Carlos, yeah, podium probably. Yeah, I would say second. And I think for third place, I'm gonna say Leclerc. I'm gonna go a Ferrari 2 podium for Jeddah. We'll
so
see.
2-3 for Ferrari. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. We'll see what happens. Awesome, Chad. Well, hey, thanks to our listeners. Thanks for joining us for this new season. We're gonna
We're
bring
back.
is we're back. It's lights out and away we go. We're gonna record as much as we can, as often as we can, and bring you new content and action as it happens. Please like, subscribe, share, tell your friends, join the conversation. But Chad, it's good to be back here with you and looking forward to a great season.
Yeah, it's good to be back with you too, and I'm looking forward to 2024. So thanks, guys.
All right, see you next time.